And we are live. Hello, Internet, and welcome to the launch party for the Stragori Deception, the first book of Sixth Transit Stragon by our author, Arlene F. Marks. I am the owner of Brain Lag, pretty much your host for tonight, Catherine Fitzsimmons. We have with us tonight, of course, Arlene, who wrote uh, the Stragori Deception, along with we had special guest Derwin Mak, who we recently published his short story collection, Mecha Jesus and Other Stories, and he also appears in the Stragori Deception as a Tuckerization. So he's here to give an extra element to that reading when we get to that point. So, Arlene, would you like to start by introducing yourself?
Thank you. Yes, I will. And I'm Arlene F. Marks. I'm a proud Canadian author of speculative fiction. I've been doing this for a very long time. Had a whole teaching career before I had a writing career, and now I've got a wonderful writing career, writing space opera, paranormal mystery, and urban fantasy, and enjoying it immensely.
And this is the fifth book of yours that Brainlag has published now. So
Yes. Yeah.
I think that's right. So yes, we have your novels previously, Adventures in Godhood, um, The Earthborn and the Bloodstone, um, Weekends Can Be Murder, one of those paranormal mysteries, as well as your short story collection, Imaginary Friends.
Yes.
So is that five or six?
That's six.
Yeah, so six books, and we have two more already signed from you too. So, and this is since 2021 was when Adventures in Godhood was released. That was the first of your books that I published. So you have been a very busy beaver.
I have indeed. 2020 was my most productive year of writing. That was the lockdown. And with nothing else to do, I went into my files and I found some stories that I had started while I was still in the classroom. Um, as a teacher, I was giving 110% to my students during the school year. And then over the summer break, sometimes during the March break or the Christmas break, I would, I would start a story or I would outline a story or do something adjacent to writing. And then it would go into a file folder and into my filing cabinet. So when I retired from the classroom, I had this filing cabinet full of stuff that I'd started but not finished. And so I said, okay, fine, let's see what's in here. And there were a lot of neat ideas that sparked further ideas that I then developed. So to say I completed 4 novels in 2020, that doesn't mean I wrote them from scratch. It means that I completed them.
That's still a very impressive achievement there. So thank you to those who are saying hi in the chat. Hi to Stufferon, to Demono, who is in the cold, unfeeling basement. Sorry to hear that. Hopefully you're keeping warm enough in there. Hello to Ruby Rosebuds from Meaford. Good to hear from you. And Stufferon, thank you. They say that's super impressive. Wow, in terms of your output. So definitely agreed. Um, so, just going back a little bit, Derwin, would you like to give us a little introduction of yourself since you're here?
Hi, yeah. My name is Derwin Mak, and I too write science fiction. Uh, and I've been writing for years. They've been published, the stories and novels have been published in all sorts of different publishers. And as Catherine mentioned, a collection of my short stories, Mecha Jesus and Other Stories, came out in March 2024. So go to the Brain Lag website and order it. And another collection of my short stories, XY Girls and More Stories, is coming out later this year, I believe in the spring sometime. Right. So that's what that's what my involvement in science fiction writing is. And I won a contest at Arlene's last book launch, and the prize was I get Tuckerized. And Tuckerized is an old science fiction fandom term. I think it's named after someone named Tucker, obviously. I forget exactly who Tucker was, but it means that there's a character named after you in someone else's novel or story. And so I show up in there's a character named after me in Arlene's latest book, which you will hear tonight. Yeah, that one.
Yeah, so all three of us will be giving a reading / dramatization, so that's going to be fun. But to start with, Arlene, how about you tell us about the Stragori deception?
Okay. Well, what I'd like to do is read you the quotation that appears at the front of the book. It's by George Orwell. The most effective way to destroy a people is to deny and obliterate their own understanding of their history. And believe it or not, that's the only part of this book that was inspired by current events. This book was completed 2 years ago. And it is the continuation of Sic Transit Terra. Now, Sic Transit Terra is a 6-book series that completes a story arc within the larger series. But book 6, The Identity Shift, also contains the seeds for the trilogy that is forthcoming, set on Stragon, which is Earth's sister planet, long lost sister planet. And so I would just like to read the back cover copy, which says everything much more succinctly than I could do just winging it. Stragon is a powder keg waiting to explode. It's a fractured society plagued by extremist bombings and street violence, a political climate fraught with lies, deception, and widespread public unrest. And the Terran immigrant population is in ever-growing danger of being targeted as the cause of it all, because an impostor on the ruling Directorate is pointing fingers squarely in their direction. Exposing the fraud and defusing the violence will take a master manipulator, and Dennis Forrand is just the man for the job. As he pulls strings across 3 continents, former Earth Intelligence Service agents, Isabela and Angeli, have their own plans to subdue the radical factions. However, with both of them under security's gaze, not only their cover but their lives may be at stake. Somehow they must all work together to outcon the usurper and pull Stragon back from the brink before a bloody conflict breaks out. Humanity's struggle to claim its place among the stars continues in Sic Transit Stragon. The quotation from Orwell. Well, Orwell has always had an influence on this series. He wrote Animal Farm, which appears in book 3. And this book contains a lot of elements that people will recognize from 1984. The manipulation of history, the revision of the language to eliminate words that mean specific things and thereby remove those things from people's memory. The constant surveillance, Big Brother is watching you. All of those things are found in the Stragori Deception.
This is the first book of a new trilogy, Sic Transit Stragon. So the intention definitely is that this can be read standalone, but it does follow up on a lot of history through the Sic Transit Terra series. Do you want to give us just a little bit of the background of what goes on in the Sic Transit Terra books that has an impact on the events of the Stragori Deception?
Okay. I'm going to go way back. The inspiration for the Sic Transit Terra books, and the first one of those came out in 2016. But there was a time, and it was about 12 years ago, when world leaders were behaving like bullies in the schoolyard. It was all very childish, and I was watching this display of petulance and pettiness and bullying, and thinking to myself, such childish behavior. Why is it that it takes us so long to figure out what's important and how things are supposed to work, and to mellow out so that we're accepting of things that we cannot change and so on, and then we die? It just didn't seem fair to me. Like, we're children until the age of 75 or 80, and then that's it, we're gone. So I came up with a scenario that could explain that. And the scenario that I came up with was, back in our ancient past, aliens must have found us and somehow meddled in our evolution. Because you're not a child for all of your life and then have, unless you're a mayfly, and then die. So they must have shortened our lifespan. And the thing is, if they were scientists conducting actual experiments, certain things are just intrinsic to the scientific method. For one thing, you have a control group. You need an animal of some kind, or a creature of some kind with a short enough lifespan that you can see the results of what you're doing in a reasonable period of time. And so I applied those to us. And there's a huge part of our past which is lost to us for that reason. And so throughout Sic Transit Terra, a document was discovered, things started coming out, the Stragori found us. They decided to reunite the two parts of the human race. They disagreed on how to do that. We had all kinds of conflict. And I think in book 3, I think it is, that Earth's ancient past is coming home to roost. That's when the document is discovered. And then from then on, things start coming out. But there's still a lot of our past that is a mystery to us. It's just, there's no living memory of that part of ancient Earth history. The aliens know what it is. The ones who experimented on us know what it is. The Stragori are the control group, and they've been evolving as we should have been allowed to do. And so their technology is like eons ahead of what we've got. And they discover us before we discover them. And so like, oh, gee, who would have thought there's an alien race out there that looks just like us? Gee. When there's a botched first contact, and this is in book 5, when there's a botched first contact and an alien race from a different sector declares a war of annihilation on humans, the Stragori take in 27 million human refugees, the Terran refugees. And they put us on a specially vacated island. But they see us as, like the intellectually challenged younger brother, and so they treat us that way. They look after us, they feed us, they give us opportunities, they help us to learn their language, they provide access to their technology as long as we can handle it, and so on and so forth. And this creates loyalty to the Directorate. But a lot of the Directorate's choices are not popular with the general Stragori population. That creates factions. And so now on Stragon, we have the loyalists who want to keep the status quo. We have the moderates who want to just rein in some of the powers of the Directorate. And we have the radicals who want to eliminate the Directorate altogether. And each of those groups has a fringe group that is starting to make its views known in unconventional and illegal ways. That's the setup in book 6, basically. Because Angeli and Isabela are part of the refugee evacuation. They're also agents of Earth intelligence. And the headquarters on Earth has decided that their agents embedded in the refugee population are going to have the mission of protecting the Terran immigrants as much as they can. At the end of book 6, all those agents are recalled, except for Angeli and Isabela. So those two are left. Dennis Forrand is a former director of Earth intelligence. So he's there as well. And so what happens in the Stragori Deception is the three of them get together, and Dennis takes over and he assigns Angeli, gives her a mission, and he gives Isabela a different mission. And he provides from his own contacts on Stragon, he provides them with partners to work with. And neither of these partnerships is very comfortable or easy. There's a lot of head banging and friction. So there are relationship issues going on in here, as well as the mission that they have to accomplish. And their mission is basically to subdue the radical, the fringe groups, the ones that are bombing buildings and attacking people in the street. You've got to somehow, defang that snake. And so that Angeli is sent to the northern continent. Like there are actually, it's a tripartite continent with channels between the three parts separating them. The farthest north is called Borea, and Angeli gets sent up there to work with the contacts up there. Isabela is working on the island among the Terran immigrant population, and Dennis is taking care of the mainland, which is the middle part. because his family is one of the important families on Stragon. And so he's got all kinds of schlep, a lot of influence, a lot of people in places that some of them are kind of shady, but that's okay, because when you're dealing with fringe groups that like to bomb buildings and attack people, you can't always play nice. And so basically, I don't want to give spoilers, so that's what this is all about.
Yeah, that's a great summary of kind of where you're coming in when you start reading the Stragori Deception. And again, it is a standalone book from the Sic Transit Terra series. You don't have to have read Sic Transit Terra to understand all of this. There's enough background given so that you can just jump right in, as I did. And I just want to thank JD Deluzio in the chat for his comment, quote, "We're behaving like bullies." Good point, incorrect verb tense. Very true.
This was a prediction. And it only took 2 years for it to come true. That's sad. That is sad.
Well, that's kind of the purview of science fiction, is that, just by the grace of the stories that we're telling in the future, we kind of have to extrapolate what's going to happen based on the present. And as a result, there tends to be a lot of very prescient science fiction stories. And of course, there's the meme that's been going around about that, about, due to advances in technology, science fiction author says, I wrote about the torment nexus as a cautionary tale. And then, modern tech people are like, through the magic of modern technology, we've managed to recreate the torment nexus from the science fiction book, Don't Create the Torment Nexus. So, yeah, we're in the...
Yeah, there's AI in here.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's true. Yeah. It's also very interesting impacts of the AI in the story. So it's now 7:23 here in the Eastern Time Zone. Shall we move on to the reading that we have tonight? Chat, what do you think? Our extra special reading with Derwin Mak joining us to provide the voice of Derwin Mak in the book. All right, so we are each going to trade off. All right, so before we get started with the reading, Arlene, do you just want to set up the scene for us?
Sure thing. Okay, so this is about Angeli. She has been sent to the northern part of the tripartite continent, Borea. She's been living on the mainland for about 5 years at this point. She's quite fluent in the Stragori language. She's able to fool people into thinking that she is native born. And so she has been sent undercover with the name Eva Moss. And her job is to make contact with someone in each of the towns up there and create a network that can find a way to silence the fringe groups. That's her assignment. What she discovers when she gets there is that the history that is commonly known on the mainland is not the history that the Boreans know. So an acquaintance called Roger has agreed to take her to visit his grandfather, who is 260 years old and has living memory of a lot of the events that Angeli wants to know about. And that is the scene. And the grandfather's name is Derwin Mak.
All right. Thank you, Arlene.
So Derwin is going to read his lines. I'm going to read Angeli's and Roger's.
And I will be doing the narration and one other character.
Okay.
So here we go. From the moment they stepped through the front door of Derwin's house, Angeli understood what Roger meant. Back on the mainland, the dying were placed in a clinical environment where everything was kept sanitary and the air smelled freshly cleaned. Here, it was redolent with a fragrance that brought back memories of Terran apples cooked with cinnamon and vanilla.
Is someone baking? She asked.
Pixelberry cookies, came the cheerful reply from the kitchen. They're Derwin's favorite, especially when he has company. The owner of the voice came out to the front hall then, wiping her hands on a red and white flowered apron. She was a plump woman with short gray hair, laughter in her bright green eyes, and dimples in both cheeks. Mariah stopped by last night and told us to expect you, she went on. I'm Adita, by the way. Go on into the parlor. Gretchen will bring him in to join you in a few minutes, and then I'll serve the tea. He's feeling frisky today, so we're running a little late.
Angeli's eyes widened. 260 years old and feeling frisky? She tried to imagine what that might look like and couldn't. At his age, what did it even mean?
You wouldn't have to wait long to find out. As soon as she and Roger had taken their seats in the cozy front room, a connecting door swung open and Derwin appeared, leaning on the arm of a woman who looked about Angeli's age. She was wearing a loose-fitting purple and green top over a pair of baggy gray trousers. Derwin was nearly bald. What little hair he had lay in wisps across his brown-spotted scalp. His skin looked like leather on his face and like parchment on his hands, where blood vessels sketched road maps just beneath the dermis. The rest of him was clad in a burnt orange pullover and a pair of black trousers whose legs disappeared down the tops of his fleece-lined slippers. With Gretchen supporting him, he shuffled forward and finally eased himself down onto a broad, tan-colored armchair. He gazed fondly down at her as she bent to position his legs on a darker tan footstool and cover them with a lap blanket. Not until Gretchen stood up and adjusted the neckline of her blouse did Angeli realize what exactly the old man had been looking at. Meanwhile, Roger was struggling to keep a straight face.
Frisky. Right.
Derwin gave Gretchen a grateful smile and said, "Thank you, my dear." The gratitude was probably genuine, but there was a glint in his eyes that belied the sickly-sounding tremor in his voice.
Gita came in with a tea tray and set it down on the low-tiled table in the middle of the room. She thrust a preemptive cookie into Derwin's grasping hand, then poured out 3 cups of a fragrant amber brew and set one of them down on the small round lampstand beside his chair. You be good now, she cautioned him on her way out of the room. He cackled and took a large bite of his cookie, with a glance at her departing back that suggested he'd rather be sinking his teeth into something else.
Hello, grandfather, said Roger, waving his hand as though to remind Derwin that he was not alone.
The old man held up a finger to pause the conversation until his mouth was empty again.
"Grandson," he acknowledged with a grin, and Angeli couldn't help noticing, speaking in a much stronger and steadier voice, "And who have you brought me today? Could it be the mysterious Eva Moss, with questions that only an old reprobate like me can answer?"
As a matter of fact, it is. She's just returned from the southern continent, and she wants to know the truth about the great emigration.
"Filled your head with nonsense about that, did they?" Derwin said, the years seeming to fall away from him as he locked eyes with Angeli. "Well, I'm not surprised. Those numquats have been marinating in misinformation and wouldn't recognize a fact if it reared up and punched them in the nose. All right, then, go ahead and ask. I'll answer you straight.
Roger says that you were in your teens when your parents took you down to the island. Is that right?
Almost. I was 14 when the applications arrived and my father signed us up to emigrate as a family. I was 18 when we received our departure date and were assigned our space aboard the ship. I was 22 when it came our turn to travel south to be processed for the off-world journey. Derwin stuffed the rest of his cookie into his mouth, then picked up his cup in both his hands and took a swallow of tea before continuing. There were so many of us, you see, and only 3 vessels large enough to carry us and our mass allotment of possessions in a single trip, so they divided the list into waves. The first to be transported were unpaired adults without children. When there were no more of those to send, they began filling the manifest with families. We were part of the 12th wave, I remember. More than 100 families, all from Borea. There must have been 500 of us. It took months to prepare us all for boarding, so we stayed in one of those little towns they built on the landmass they called the island, which is a silly name to give a continent, if you ask me, but that's what they called it, and the label stuck. Anyway, we'd been living there for a couple of weeks when my father suddenly changed his mind about leaving Stragon. He wouldn't tell us why, just ordered us to pack up our things and get ready to go north.
But he did explain eventually, right? Roger prompted him, sounding like a child who was hearing a favorite bedtime story for the 20th time and already knew how it ended.
Derwin bobbed his head in confirmation and replied, "He told my mother, and she waited until we were halfway home to tell me. She said he'd overheard a couple of officials talking about the Southerners' plans to take over the northern continent once most of us had been relocated."
Us, meaning the objectors? Said Angeli.
"That's what they're calling us now? It was something much less flattering back then," he said, pausing for another mouthful of tea. After hearing what the Southerners had in mind for Borea after we were gone, my father immediately shared the information with the other families at the processing center. It changed their minds about emigrating as well. We had plenty of company for the journey back north. All 100 families up and left at the same time to discourage the Southerners from trying to stop us. We heard there were other shiploads of emigrants after that, but they were from the southern continent. As soon as we got back, my father called an all-town meeting so he could warn everyone about what he'd learned. Then we reopened trade negotiations with the Southerners' commercial representatives.
Derwin leaned forward to snag another cookie, but Edita had put the plate beyond his reach. Roger pushed it closer to him, and Derwin thanked him and took 2, one for each hand.
I was told there was sickness on the island, Angeli said, that the objectors were quarantined there and millions of them died before a vaccine could be developed.
Derwin froze with his right-hand cookie halfway to his mouth and shot her an incredulous stare.
"Millions!" he hooted. "Now that would be a trick, since only a couple 100,000 of us in total signed up to emigrate. Many of those changed their minds, and not all the ones who did leave went to the island at the same time to be processed. Someone's been japing you around, young lady." Still holding his cookie, he waggled a reproving forefinger at her.
Well, what about the sickness part? She persisted.
"That part is true, but it didn't happen until long after the emigration stopped. It was mostly caused by all the toxic waste the Southerners dumped on the island after the deal we struck with them prevented them from dumping it here. Ha!"
What began as a laugh turned into a coughing fit that brought Edita racing into the room. She thumped him on the back with the flat of her hand a couple times. Then she noticed what he was holding, and she drew herself up and regarded him sternly for a moment, shaking her head. "When he eats or talks too fast, things can go down the wrong pipe," she said, addressing Roger and Angeli. "I keep reminding him that he has to take things slowly at his age, but he thinks he's only 150 years old."
Clearing his throat with a final humph, he leered at her. "I've got another 30 good ones in me, and you know it."
She blurted an exasperated syllable and headed for the door.
Now where was I? Derwin said. Ah, the negotiation. There was already a comprehensive trade deal in place, but the Southerners had developed a new technology. Surprise, surprise. And they were short of particular metals that weren't covered in the earlier agreement. Borea was rich with the right kind of ore, which gave us the leverage we needed to get what we really wanted. A defined southern border, created by dredging out a channel between the continents and the right to decide who could cross it northbound.
So basically, you gained sovereignty over your land, Angeli mused. And the Directorate went along with this?
As she and Roger drank their tea, waiting for Derwin's response, he gobbled the last of his right-hand cookie, chewed and swallowed it, then replied casually, Actually, I don't recall anyone consulting them about it. The Southerners signed the agreement as an amendment to the existing trade treaty. All the other negotiating terms were still applied, including our insistence on mining the ore ourselves in ways that wouldn't harm the environment.
Tell her who refined the ore, grandfather, Roger prodded him.
The Southerners did, of course. We shipped it to them raw, figuring they were that desperate for the metal, they could damn well deal with its byproducts themselves. I thought you just wanted to know about the emigrations, he added. Peering at Angeli over the rim of his cup, he sipped another mouthful.
I do, she assured him. Were the emigrants told in advance where they were being sent?
Now he was scowling at her. Of course, he snapped. No one with a working brain would have stepped aboard a ship without knowing what to expect at the other end of the journey.
So the space colonization program was already in place?
Stragon never had a colonization program. The Southerners may have planned for one after the emigrations were halted, but the Directorate must have stepped in and stopped them because it was never implemented. Good thing, too. Imagine the techno-poison those geniuses would have spewed out into the galaxy. Derwin shuddered visibly at the thought.
But they were colonizing another world, even if it was just the one.
He made an impatient sound. We weren't colonizing, we were emigrating, he corrected her tartly. What happened was the Directorate sent out exploration vessels shortly after that document was dug up in the southern continent.
Alarms began shrilling at the back of Angeli's brain. A document? She echoed softly.
He gave her a strange look. You really don't know? Those Southerners must have tampered with your memory when you weren't looking. An excavation crew working on an extension to a tunnel system came across an abandoned bunker. Some sort of observation post, they gathered. And a few artifacts and a single piece of paper were found inside it. That discovery was a world-shaking event. The writing was in an alien language. A team of experts worked on it for months. Once their translation was complete, the Directorate shared it with the population.
Was it about an alien experiment? She asked. A chill settled into her core as she recalled what the Phrygian observers had told her, Isabela, and Olivia not that long ago. The Stragori were the control group, protected from outside interference for as long as the Phrygians could keep their experiment on Earth running. Ultimately, Stragon was humanity's best hope to survive the genocidal efforts of the Great Galactic Council.
Derwin frowned. Not that I recall. It was all about how we had been brought to Stragon from another world thousands of years earlier. It said that our home planet was out there, still habitable and populated by beings just like ourselves. If that was true, it meant the ancient myths and legends that had been passed down for millennia from one generation to the next were actually the recorded memories of our distant ancestors. Many Stragori believed the document had been planted as part of some elaborate hoax. So, to either disprove or authenticate it, explorers were sent out to find this world, and with it, the rest of our race. And one of them was successful. That's what the Directorate told us, at any rate, and why so many of us signed up to emigrate. We would be returning to our beginning for a great and noble cause, to reunite the two halves of humanity.
As a shockwave of realization swept through her. Angeli drew an audible breath. They found Earth, she whispered hoarsely.
Locking eyes with her, he replied, in our ancient tales, it's called Terra. We were promised that we would be making history. Nothing less than that could have induced us to leave our homes in Stragon. Now, with the Directorate's blessing, the emigration is reversed, and a nation of Terrans have settled on this world. But not to make history, I'm afraid.
Angeli swallowed hard. Do you believe they're terrorists?
Terrorists? No. Unwelcome would be a better word, I think. But what do I know? He added, once more speaking in his thin, quavery voice. I'm just a very old man with lingering appetites.
Thank you, everyone. Good reading.
All right, by the way, I did find the historical source for the term Tuckerization. And it goes back to the prolific science fiction writer Bob Wilson Tucker, also known as Bob Tucker. You may have heard the name. He wrote during the 1930s and 40s and 50s, and he was in the habit of putting the names of his friends and other fellow writers in his stories. And one of his one of the most famous Tuckerizations was actually done by H.P. Lovecraft, who included a character named Robert Bloch in the short story The Shambler from the Stars. But then you know the name Robert Bloch as the horror writer who wrote Psycho, later made into a movie by Alfred Hitchcock.
Nice, thank you.
You learn something new every day.
Yeah, but that term Tuckerization had to come from somewhere, and that's where it comes from, Bob Tucker.
Of course, yes. Interesting that it would come from someone who Tuckerized other people rather than someone whose name appeared in other books.
Yeah.
And JD Deluzio in the chat adds, right, it was reciprocal. Bloch had a Lovecraft stand-in get murdered in a story written at the same time, which they made an agreement to do. So there you go, a little bit of science fiction / horror history. So, so one thing that really stuck out to me with the Stragori Deception in particular is how complex it is. You've got all these different characters, you've got all these politics going on. You've got this advanced technology that you have to juggle with your spy characters, basically. What tricks do you have for juggling all of that?
I have a secret, which isn't going to be secret much longer. I'm neurodivergent. And actually, there's a whole story behind that. I just found out a couple of years ago. So I've been neurodivergent since birth. Always assumed that everybody else was just like me. Only somehow they were doing everything right and I couldn't seem to do anything right. And I mean, I was tripping. I was a klutz. I would trip over cracks in the sidewalk. I went through my whole childhood with Band-Aids on both knees. And my logic didn't seem to be the same as everybody else's logic. But I was an avid reader. I was an early reader. And my mother, bless her, as soon as she realized that, she started taking me to the library once a week. We would hop on the streetcar and go to the children's house at the Toronto Public Library. And I would take out the 5 books that I was allowed. And then they'd be all read by Sunday night. And I would have to wait until the following Saturday. But my parents were also avid readers. And so I plundered their bookshelves for stuff to read. And as a result, I had a really big vocabulary. And a lot of facts in my head that I didn't fully understand or put together. And as a result, my teachers didn't know what to do with me. So they figured I didn't need to be taught. And I had to become an autonomous learner in order to learn anything. And so the way my brain operates now, I mean, a couple of years, no, it was last year at the last book launch, you asked me how I was able to write so many different plot threads and so on. And my answer was very glib. It was, I think that's just the way my brain operates. Now I understand how it operates, so I can give you a better answer. Most people have a left and right hemisphere, and the left hemisphere is the seat of rational thought, logic, deduction, critical thinking. And the right hemisphere is creativity and intuition. And they don't operate well together. And so the common wisdom is you draft using the right brain, and then you turn on your left brain for editing. I can't do that. My brain does not operate that way. With my brain, it's divided into the conscious and the subconscious. The subconscious is a plotter. The conscious is a pantser. And so what I do is, and I don't do this consciously, it just happens. It's the conscious brain says, gee, I'd like to complete this story, and I think I'd like to add this element and that element and that element, and I want the climax to happen in this way. And at the end of it, I want to have a wedding. And my conscious brain hands that off to my subconscious brain. The subconscious never rests. It's working 24/7. And so I will wake up, and when I talk about stories bubbling away on the back burners, what I really mean is my subconscious is busy plotting. And it plots the entire story. And when it's done, it sends me the opening scene. It plays it like on a screen inside my head. I can see the characters and hear their dialogue. I know what the setting looks like. I don't know what everything means necessarily, but I've learned to trust my subconscious, and I write what I see on that screen. And when I've written that, with my left and right brains working at the same time, so I'm not only drafting, I'm editing at the same time. The next day, I'll have 2 scenes in my head, and I'll write those. And so a good output for me of words is anywhere from 500 to 1,000 words a day, because that's about the length of a scene. And there will be details that occur to me to put into a scene. And well, for example, she needs to be wearing a red scarf. I have no idea whether that's going to be significant later. It just, it's a great idea, and I'm going to go with it. And then lo and behold, 3 chapters later, that scarf turns up somewhere it's not supposed to be, and it's the key to solving the mystery. The subconscious knew this all along. But it's been feeding me this stuff as I go along. That's the way my brain operates. So it knows how to integrate and weave all of those plots together. It knows how everything's going to end up. It knows how to reintegrate everything and then tie it up with a bow. And I pantsed my way all the way through 6 books of Sic Transit Terra. And I actually said there are 6 books here. And sure enough, book number 6 was the conclusion to that story arc.
Wow.
But that's the So it helps sometimes to be neurodivergent. I just wish I could have gotten a diagnosis because I ran into ageism. The professionals who specialize in diagnosing, they don't want patients my age. They want children because, as they put it, they want it to make an appreciable difference to someone's life to have the diagnosis.
As though it won't for you.
Yeah, well, the word that came immediately to my mind was bullshit.
Yeah.
It would have made the world of difference to me just to know. But I was born at a time when special ed wasn't a thing, and I mean, your kid was either right in the head or not right in the head. That was it. And if they were abnormal, then the way to make them normal was to force them to do normal things. And if you're a klutz like me, sports don't work. I'm sorry. All that did was depress me and tank my self-esteem. It was not a pleasant experience at all.
Mm. Along these lines, in previous launch parties, you've told the story of how you learned to read, which I love that story. And since we have some new people in the audience tonight, would you like to tell us again how that happened?
Oh yeah, it was, I was self-taught. And the very first thing I ever read was a stop sign. I think I was about 3 years old, maybe it going on 4. It was in that age range. Um, I got to read the comic strips. My parents, when my parents brought the newspaper in and they would, give me the comics to read, and they thought, oh, isn't that cute? She's looking at the pictures and she's laughing at the pictures. And then my mother suddenly realized, wait a minute, no, she knows what's in those bubbles. She's reading. But the very first thing that I ever read was a stop sign. And I have a vivid memory of the moment that happened. And it was like, how an epiphany sometimes strikes you like almost like a physical blow. It's like a spring. I looked at the stop sign and those squiggly lines spoke to me. I could hear them. And it was such a wonderful, I don't know, it was empowering. It was empowering. I could read a stop sign. And so every time I came across that S, I could sound it out, and the T and the O and the P. And from sounding out, I managed to teach myself to read.
Very
Now, there was a
impressive.
disadvantage to that because um, a lot of English words are not pronounced the way they're spelled. And I was in a spelling bee once, and the word that I tripped over and I simply could not understand, it was chamois, which is spelled Chamois.
Okay. I honestly, that's the first time I've heard it said aloud.
Chamois. That's the way everybody pronounced it, except that I had only encountered it on the page. And when you see someone mispronouncing a word, sometimes it's because they've only ever seen it written down. They've never heard anyone say it out loud.
Yep. Yeah, I don't recall when I first learned to read, but I remember when my child first read a word out loud. Uh, it was in the car. I don't even know where we were going, but she was back there looking at the tag on her plushie and sounded out and said the brand name on the tag. And yeah, definitely empowering is a good word for that realization of, oh, okay, that's how you make the word.
Yeah.
So thank you for that. Also, JD Deluzio added in the chat, Lovecraft killed de facto Block in The Haunter of the Dark, and Block killed de facto Lovecraft in The Shambler from the Stars. So there's your fun fact of the past 15 minutes.
Yeah, our genre's glorious heritage and history, so to speak. Yeah.
It's there's a lot of interesting history. I'm actually reading an anthology of space opera stories at the moment, which in the introduction it goes into the history of space opera and how the term became what it is, which originally it was a disparaging term, comparing it to soap operas, because the early science fiction stories that were called space opera were just these campy, characterless, big scientist or, Air Force captain goes out to the stars and defeats the aliens and whatever. And it was only kind of as the genre developed that it got a bit more of a more prestigious kind of, I wouldn't say prestigious, but it was taken seriously and it became a serious genre of fiction.
Yeah,
Is there?
I remember Westerns being called disparagingly horse operas.
Yes, yes, that's also mentioned in the introduction. And I mean, how many Western movies are now absolute classics? So, is there any particular space opera that inspires you?
Oh, now if we're including television, Babylon 5, oh yeah, Battlestar Galactica, both the original and the remake. I love them both for different reasons. Stargate, the Stargate franchise. I was more a Trekkie than a Star Wars fan. I must confess, although Trekkie, I always objected to the term Trekkie because it was a diminishing term. So I always prefer to call myself a Trekker.
I think originally it was a bit of a disparaging term, but then Trekkies came to own the label. But yeah, there seems to be definitely a variety in terms of what Star Trek fans prefer to call themselves. Ruby Rosebuds in the chat also says Vorkosigan series is a good space opera series by Lois McMaster Bujold. And
Arlene, there are some traditional space opera elements to your Stragori series or novels. Like, for example, the humans are spread across different planets, and just like in the Foundation, there's a theory they all came from one planet, but they haven't proved it yet. That's actually in the Asimov novel, not in the new TV series, but that's actually in the Asimov novel that there's a theory they originated from one planet before they spread out to different planets, and the concept that groups of humans may have been taken away and planted on other planets. That I remember that being a traditional space opera theme as well. So
And
you certainly have
yeah.
the heritage of a genre in your books.
And there's a lot of influence from Robert A. Heinlein in my books. I loved Clifford D. Simak and Silverberg, Robert Silverberg. Let's see, I read a lot of Asimov. I read the Foundation series. I read the Robot series. Also, his mysteries with R. Daniel Oliva. Was it? I'm very bad with book titles, but I can remember the names of individual characters. But this is a long time ago, and I mean, between us, my husband and I, when we combined our libraries when we got married, we had more books than the local public library did in that genre, and there was very little overlap. So I read voraciously. Discovered Heinlein's Tunnel to the Stars, I think it was called, or Tunnel in the Sky, something like that, when I was 11 years old. And it resonated with me because it's about a group of teenagers who are sent through a portal to an alien world, and it's some kind of a test. They have to survive on this world for some period of time, and then they're going to be brought back. And something goes wrong with the portal, and they can't be brought back. And so they have to establish their own society. And they go through all of the stages, the growth stages of deciding what the rules are going to be and what the relationships are going to be, and is there going to be a hierarchy, or are they going to have a democracy, or what's going to go on? And so they basically grow up and they establish their society, and they're running very nicely, and then the portal gets fixed and they're brought back to Earth and demoted back to being teenagers. And I really identified with those kids because I never felt like a child. I always felt like an adult trapped in a child's body, dropped behind enemy lines. I was negotiating my way through hostile territory, and I did not realize that there were others like me. I honestly believed I was alone. I was completely on my own. I had to, if I was going to survive, I had to develop these skills. Okay. And I did. But I was 11 years old. I read that book and it just hooked me. And I read everything I could get my hands on by Heinlein. And when I was done, I branched out and I read Blish. I read Bradbury. Oh, I loved Bradbury. Bradbury and Blish, and now I wasn't so much on Clark. Simak, yes. There were a couple of authors who just put out one or two books. R.A. Lafferty was one of them. That was an experimental kind of imaginative fiction. But that, all of that formed a foundation so that as an adult, when all of these TV shows came on, I was really into them and looking at the storytelling and looking at the relationships between the characters and just getting into their worlds.
A couple of comments in the chat from JD Deluzio. He also suggests Dune, desert space opera, of course, big in media right now, of course, with the recent series on Netflix. He's also asking about the book you were talking about, Tunnel to the Sky, or whatever it was. He says, is that the one that's kind of Heinlein's answer to Lord of the Flies, except Heinlein's kids fare a lot better? Which
Yes.
is honestly what was on my mind when you were describing the book.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. Well, I think, Arlene, we must belong to the same generation because we read a lot of the same authors' books. I did. Mine's included Ray Bradbury as well.
Yeah.
I think it's I think that it's good for a writer to be well read, not just in.
Yeah.
And by well read I mean reads a lot and reads a diversity of different works, right? Not just one author, right? And it's funny. I'm wondering if the if a generation of science fiction fans who are only in their 20s and 30s would recognize some of the names you rattled off, like Heinlein and Clark and Clifford D. Simak. But what I've noticed is, when I edit stories or when people, ask me to edit a story or something, I've noticed that the people who have a literary, who have a extensive reading in the genre and know its history tend to be better writers and better storytellers than the people who only have a limited scope, like say they've watched a few TV series uh, that that are recent, and then they decide to take up writing, probably because they can't afford to produce a TV series, right? So they take up writing. But I've noticed that those who read books and love books tend to be much better authors than those who are simply writing because they don't have the money to be a TV producer, for example, right? And it's I'm glad to hear you were raised in the classics as well.
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
And like as I say, I read voraciously, so it wasn't just in the genre. I mean, I had jags. I would get really fascinated by ESP, and I would grab every book that I could find on ESP, and I would read up. So it was like obsessive research almost that I was doing. Then I went through a stage where Tudor England fascinated me, and so I was reading romances that were set in Tudor England. I was reading biographies of historical figures from Tudor England. I was reading up on history. And then I went through a mythology phase where I was just, gobbling up every kind of mythology that I could get my hands on. And it's like I was feeding my imagination all of this stuff. It's like if you have 5 Lego bricks, you're not going to be able to do much with it. If you've got a bucket of Lego bricks, there's a lot more that you can do.
Yeah, and a bucket of different colors too.
Yes, different colors, different shapes.
Yeah.
Going back to what you were saying about the well-read authors, Derwin, J.D. DeLuzio in the chat agreed with your point and mentions that John Scalzi's politics are far removed from Heinlein's in most respects, but the influence is unmistakable and acknowledged. And just kind of in general, I think it kind of goes back to the idea that reading a lot makes you more empathetic because you're reading the points of view of all these different types of characters, and so you get to see the world in many different ways and see the types of struggles that different types of people go through with. And I think that's a large part of what makes well-read people better writers, is that they have.
I agree with you. I can tell when I'm editing a story or asked to edit a story, in some cases a whole novel, written by someone who isn't well read or doesn't like writing. They just thought, hey, I'll write a science fiction story, become famous, right? Or I'll sell it to Hollywood. And I noticed that the books, the stories by the people with a literary background, or they just love writing, you do get the sense of what the characters are feeling and thinking. And not all the characters are feeling and thinking the same thing. They're all different people. But with the people who who come from a TV or movie fandom background and then decide they want to take up writing a novel or a story, and 90% of the time I ask them, why do you want to become a novelist? Why do you want to write stories? They say, oh, I'm hoping this gets sold to become a TV show or a movie, right? I notice in those stories, you don't get that sense of what the characters are feeling or what they're thinking or how it's almost like they just took a script synopsis and added more verbs to them, right? You get that feeling, right? And I do encourage science fiction writers to read a variety of things. I mean, Arlene, you talked about you read romance novels. I think you actually worked for Harlequin at one time, didn't you?
I did. I was a freelancer. I wasn't an employee of Harlequin,
Mm-hmm.
but I did do. I read their slush pile,
Mm-hmm.
and I was taken on board when they acquired the adaptation rights to the inventory of their counterpart in France,
Yeah.
Talandier Books. And so they had these books translated from, these were, romance novels translated from French to English. And they discovered that just how verbose a language French is, because these novel length stories became novelettes when they were translated into English, and they needed to have subplots added. They needed more character development. And so I became very good at that. And I think of the first 48 titles, I worked on 36.
These are the romance ones, right? Because they also had a science fiction line. I think it was Laser Books or something like that.
Laser Books, yeah.
Yeah.
It was through submitting a manuscript to Laser Books that I made contact with the editor, who was in charge of with the Mystique. It was called Mystique.
Mystique. Oh yes.
Mystique
Harlequin
line.
Mystique and Harlequin Starfire or something like that. Yeah.
Yeah, and he contacted me and said, we need to talk. And he said, would you like to do this? And I just wanted to write. But I thought, hey, it's writing adjacent, I'll do it. So it was really substantive editing. It was also there was some additional scenes, additional characters, and so on. But there were maybe a dozen books in those first 48 that I basically tore apart and rebuilt from scratch.
Oh, no.
Yeah.
And it was excellent, excellent practice. That's how I learned to write a novel.
We've got some interesting conversation going on in the chat, excuse me, as well, about Game of Thrones and the Song of Ice and Fire series.
Oh yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So, well, what's one of the best books you've read recently, Arlene?
Okay, I just did a review of Randy McCharles's trilogy, the Connecticut Gumshoe trilogy, and what I found was they're all standalones, but they build. So this is the kind of thing that I do, and so I really appreciated how he worked that in. But I would say the third book in that trilogy was the one that really grabbed me. It was a mashup of of Macbeth and Casablanca.
And you had these reviews posted on the Amazing Stories website.
Yes, and there are going to be more of them.
Excellent.
Graham Cameron liked mine so well that he actually asked me if I would mind doing, doing it at intervals, every couple of months. He'd like to post one of my guest reviews, and I'm very happy to do that. It gives me great incentive to read my TBR pile, which is because what I find is when I'm writing, I don't have time to read. And it's almost as if I can only hold one universe in my head at a time. So I take breaks. I'll take a month and I'll just read. It's like, replenishing my well.
Yeah. What about you, Derwin? What's one of the better books that you've read recently?
Okay, it's one called it's categorized as a fantasy because there's a few ghosts in it, but it's called She Who Became the Sun. And just let me go find the author's name. Hold on for a sec. Okay.
Yeah, that one sounds familiar. I think it's been big lately.
Yes, it has been. You know what? I can't find the book right now. Just let me Google it. But She Who Became the Sun is like a retelling of the end of the Yuan dynasty and the beginning of the Ming dynasty, as the Ming began to replace the Yuan in China. But all the characters are recast as LGBTQ plus type characters, right? So that's not completely historically accurate, and there is a fantasy element to it in terms of the ghosts. And so She Who Became the Sun. Let me just Shelley Parker Chan, right? Australian author. I guess I think Shelley Parker Chan identifies as non-binary. I'm not sure what pronouns Shelley Parker Chan uses, but it's it won a Lambda Award for transgender fiction. But the characters are so interesting, and it's one of those novels where you get the feeling of what the characters are thinking and what they're going through, right? Uh, that I think it's not just an LGBTQ plus queer novel. I think people of all sorts of backgrounds would enjoy it, right? And the other thing I liked about it is that there's a lot of political conniving and backstabbing and coups plotted in it. Sometimes from people you don't expect, right? I was thinking, oh, yep, they got that part of the Yuan dynasty and the Ming dynasty correct. So that's a recent one I did read, and I quite enjoyed it.
Excellent. Thank you for sharing.
Yeah.
And just on the topic of queer fiction, what you were saying about how it's there's broad appeal to all people. I'm reminded of a book that I read several years ago now. I have to look up the title of it. I'm just going into my Google Play Books here as I try to find it. Cocktails at 7, Apocalypse at 8 by Don Basing-Thwaite. That was basically the gayest book I have ever read, and it was an absolute delight. It was hilarious. It's a comedy book, so I can definitely recommend that one. So one other thing that you've been doing a lot of over the years, Arlene, is sharing your expertise in writing, hosting classes. You've actually written some books on writing fiction, as well as doing panels at conventions across Canada. And recently, you started a new event right there in Collingwood, Calling Word, which
Calling
is
Word, yes.
yes, which is a great name, I have to say.
We have a lovely Facebook page up now, and anyone can find it. Just do the search and put in Calling Word, and it's up there. We're in planning stages right now. I headed the steering committee for Calling Word 2024, and very stealthily, I trained a couple of my other committee members to take over so that I wouldn't have to be the one to blame for 2025. They're doing a bang up job. In fact, they are both in the chat right now, I think.
Excellent. Great job to both of you for keeping it
Um,
rolling.
yeah, it's our hope that this can grow and become an annual event. Because I felt a real loss when Ad Astra folded. That for years, that was one of my go-to conferences. I always attended Ad Astra. I participated on the panels. I did presentations. And I really enjoyed that event. And when COVID hit and they simply faded away, it left a void. And so what I'm hoping is that Calling Word can fill that void eventually. It's still got a ways to go. It's going to grow. The steering committee has some really interesting plans.
Yeah, keep us
And
posted on that Calling Word. Yeah, keep us posted on it.
yes,
The first one, sorry, was in October last
yes,
year.
we kicked off Ontario Public Library Week. And we are currently in negotiations with the library, which is our venue, to find out when would be the best time to have Calling Word 2025. So we've started our planning very early in the year because we want to make sure that all the major stuff is out of the way, and all that's left is the little niggly details that can just be taken care of very quickly. And the date is one of those major details. We want to make sure that it's going to not going to conflict with too many other things that are going on. But we set a very respectable bar for the event last October, and I think it's just everything's going to improve from here. It's going to get bigger. It's going to get better. It's going to be a lot of fun.
Wonderful.
But also, there's something else that we're doing, and this is under the auspices of the South Georgian Bay Writers Connection. The writers group that I belong to is one of 4 or 5 in a kind of a loose affiliation, all in the region around the southern shore of Georgian Bay. And what we've been doing is a kind of a scaled down version of Calling Word that can move around and go from the library from one library to another library all around the region, and each spring have it in a different location. So this year it's going to be May the 10th, and it's going to be at the Thornbury Library. We've already booked it. It's all set. It's going to be there. I don't know where it's going to be in 2026, but it will be somewhere. And but there will be workshops, there will be panels, there will be interactive stuff. We maybe a salon, maybe we do an open mic. It could be anything, but it's basically a literary event, and it'll be for the one day in the spring.
And is this focused on genre fiction specifically, or just fiction in general?
Literature in general. So like in our groups, we have poets, we have nonfiction writers, we have memoirists, we have short story writers, the short form, we have the long form writers, we have historical writers, all different genres, all different areas. And so we're trying to expand to bring in a younger and broader spectrum of attendees. And so, we're talking about going, about venturing into things like the graphic novel, the stage play, stuff like that. And
Very
and
interesting.
so it's becoming quite an interesting adventure.
Well, that's wonderful, and definitely best wishes with the official calling word and the Thornberry event and all the other upcoming events. So,
And I've worked up a presentation as well that I will be doing on March the 12th, which is in the middle of the school break um, this year at the Wasaga Beach Public Library about the empowering effect of literacy skills on children. And it's basically for parents, teachers, and caregivers. And it's going to be, well, I'm going to walk them through some of the techniques that they can use just in the home environment. This all comes from a booklet that I created back in 2020 when the schools were shut down and a lot of parents became homeschoolers, like, surprise, now you're homeschooling. And so I wrote a little manual on how to teach literacy in a one-on-one situation, not in a classroom. And so I'm going to be adapting that and offering it for free to any of the attendees who are interested in doing this with their kids.
wonderful. And will you also be traveling to other conventions or festivals or such this year?
I am booked to attend When Words Collide in Calgary in August. And let's see, so there's Calling Word in October or sometime in the fall. Um, yeah, that's pretty much it. I'm spreading it out because what I find is the older I get, the longer it takes for me to come down and settle back into my routine and get back to my writing.
I get that. Yeah.
It's the writing that is really most important to me right now.
Yeah, that makes sense. How about you, Derwin? Are you going to any conferences or writing related events?
No, unfortunately not. I did get to World Fantasy in Niagara Falls, New York last October. Yeah, and you were there too, right? So that was really fun. I mean, I go as a regular fan to some of those things like Fan Expo and Anime North and Star Trek Las Vegas, but with the demise of Ad Astra and the Montreal convention concept, which was gone ages ago already. It's there aren't that many of the literary oriented ones to attend, other than When Worlds Collide. And there was one in Ottawa, CanCon, that I would have started reattending had not some health issues with a member of the family interrupted. But that's I won't get into the details. But things like that can't interrupt your life.
Absolutely.
I was thinking though, I mean, I was thinking that perhaps keep us posted about the calling word, Arlene, because I was thinking that perhaps the model of a 3-day conference inside a hotel might not be that feasible anymore. It's a lot of work to run. You need people to run it, and also they're expensive too. I mean, even a low budget convention like Ad Astra. I mean, when I say low budget, I don't mean any disrespect to it, but it's obviously not running with the same budget as, say, San Diego Comic Con, for example, right? But even a low budget convention like that costs a lot more money than it can take in. So I was thinking that perhaps the future may be in the shorter events or 1 afternoon or 1 day events like what my livery company does in London. I'll explain what I mean by livery company. 3 years ago, at the height of the pandemic, I joined a livery company, and the ceremony was by Zoom. And livery companies are the successors to the medieval guilds that existed in London, right? So there's a livery company for people who make wheels. They used to make wheels for wagons. Now they include the companies that make tires, right? There's a livery company for goldsmiths. There's a livery company for merchant tailors, people who make clothes. My livery company, the one I joined, was for the worshipful company of stationers and newspaper makers. The livery company for the publishing and writing trades, right? So chartered by Queen Mary the First, the one who succeeded Henry VIII's daughter, right? And what they do is it's a livery company that's still very much attached to the publishing industry in the UK. And what they do is they hold things like literary lunch. You go to lunch and meet an author. They hold book launches in the afternoon. They don't do a 3-day convention about science fiction or detective fiction or whatever, but they hold these small events that take place over an afternoon or a day or an evening. And I think that might be the motto of the type of literary event that can replace Ad Astra, right? Because as much as I loved Ad Astra, I can see why it faded away, simply because you needed a lot of money and labor. You needed more money and labor than was available to it.
Yes. And
Are we going to have the draw?
Oh, draw. Yeah.
yes, thank you for reminding me, Arlene, and for everybody for sticking through it this long. Yes, we are going to have a prize draw. Arlene, what are we going to give away?
Well, as has become my practice, the prize is going to be you'll be, was it Tuckerized? Is that the word?
That's the word.
In my next book. The next book, which is in the editorial stages right now, is a paranormal murder mystery. There are ghosts. They are friendly ghosts. They are interesting ghosts and funny ghosts. And there's the Scooby Gang. There's a group of 4 friends who get involved in solving a mystery in their town. And it's a lot of fun. Going to be another chonker. It's 105,000 words, but and so the winner of this draw will have one of the characters named after them in this book,
As well as
receiving a free copy.
signed by the author.
Yes.
So the giveaway.
I'll be snail mailing it to you myself with my signature in it, and you will be able to proudly display it and show it and brag to all your friends. You've been Tuckerized.
And who knows, maybe it'll be as fun a character as Derwin ended up as in the Stragori Deception. So as those in the chat have seen, the giveaway is now open. All you have to do to enter is type # or hashtag giveaway, and you're automatically entered. So we'll leave that open for just a few minutes while we get the entries in, and we'll draw that. And any final words, Arlene, about the Stragori Deception, about writing, about anything in general?
Oh, geez, there's so much I would like to say.
I'll have to get some interviews scheduled, you know, get into the nitty-gritty. Um, we can say the book is now available. You can order it through every major bookstore. There's ebooks available through all the major ebook stores, Kindle, Kobo, iBooks, Google Play, Barnes and Noble Nook. You can order them, and basically, I've had people ask this in other launch parties. The best way to buy a book is the easiest and preferred method that you have to purchase a book. If it's easiest for you to go into a Barnes and Noble and say, "Hey, I'd like to buy this book," then that is perfect. Um, and certainly, if you buy it from a store in your country, then you don't have to worry about any tariffs or anything. It'll come from your country.
I think maybe one thing I'd like to say is that this is actually a limited series. This is not going to keep going for 20 or 30 books. The Sick Transit Stragon is a trilogy. It's going to wrap up that story arc in 3 books. And then there's going to be a duology. And it's going to be called Sick Transit Humanitas. And everything is going to be answered at the end of the series. So there is a conclusion. My subconscious knows what's going to happen. It's going to tell me when the time is right. And it's going to be in total 11 books.
Very nice. But in the meantime, later this year, we have Remains to be Seen coming up, which also we're going to be having an in-person launch party for that one, correct?
Yes, it's going to be held at the Collingwood Public Library. It's on Saturday, July the 19th, I believe. And it's from 1:30 till 3:30 in the afternoon.
Great. So, yeah.
Yeah. And there will be cookies, there will be readings, there will be prizes, there will be discussions and lots of fun, lots of Q&A, interesting discussions.
You can see us in person. Shake hands or fist bump or
depending on who wins the draw, you might even meet the special guest who's been Tuckerized. I use the word 3 times now. It's mine. I own it.
All right. So that said, I think it's time to draw a winner. Congratulations to JD Deluzio.
Ah!
You will be Tuckerized in Remains to be Seen and will receive a signed copy of the book when it is out. So thank you to everybody who joined in on the giveaway. Thank you to everyone who came for the whole launch party. This has been a lot of fun. As always, Arlene, you make such interesting conversation. And Derwin, thank you so much for joining us for it and for your reading and your insights. Any final words?
Keep writing.
Exactly. And reading.
And reading.
Yes.
Especially
reading and writing.
Buy Canadian books.
Yes.
And if you go to the URL in the bottom corner of your stream there, brain-lag.com, our books section, you can filter by Canadian authors. So thank you everyone for coming. Thanks and congratulations, Arlene, on another successful book launch. And I hope everybody has a fantastic weekend.
Bye-bye.